Okay, hello everybody and welcome to the Operator Framework Working Group meeting for Tuesday the 6th of June. We have a few items on the agenda already, but let's start as always with a quick milestone check-in. So milestone 030, 3 open items due by 16th of June. Anyone have any updates for these they want to talk about before we carry on with the agenda?
Yeah, I think there are a couple of issues that are not added at the milestone, possibly. If you look at the projects, I'm guessing that's where it is. Oh, it's not here.
No projects open. This is under the operator controller project. Would it be projects at a higher level?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, that's the one. OLM V1, and then milestone 5. The one beside that. Yep. So I think the 215, 238. I think those are not showing up in that milestone, possibly because we haven't added them to the milestone yet.
Yep.
But, yeah.
So somebody needs to do that. No, I don't think I have permissions to do that kind of thing. So
yeah, I can make sure that they are there in the background.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Any updates on any of these as well then? Or should we just be using this milestone board in the agenda instead of using the other one? Would that be more sensible? I don't know.
Yeah, let's move to using this view.
Okay, cool. Let's add that in here then. Assuming there are no other comments, I'm just going to go and drop that in there for now. Right.
I think there was one issue in there about reconciling operators when catalogs change, which I think merged, but maybe we didn't talk to that issue.
This one.
Yeah. I don't know,
yeah,
Alex.
that did.
So that's going to be.
Maybe we just do that demo. Maybe that's the holdup.
Yeah, maybe. Yes. Well, we don't have that demo on the agenda today. Is that demo for some other agenda?
Yeah, that one looks separate. And Keita, I don't know if you're prepared to do that demo. If not, no big deal. But maybe we can tee that up for next week.
Yeah, I don't have it lined up for this week yet.
Okay, so let's drop that on the agenda for next week. Okay. What's that going to be? That's going to be June 13th.
Yep, 13th.
Okay, clean that up in a bit, but okay, great. Any more on milestones? Okay, let's move on to other items in the agenda then. So removing OPM registry serve. Joe, you on the call?
Yep, I'm here.
Cool.
So this is exactly what it sounds like. As we were building some improvements in the FBC server, I noticed that in order to actually make those improvements, it was basically essential for us to diverge the SQLite server from the FBC server, unless we wanted to basically make those same changes in the way that we build SQLite databases. But we didn't want to do that because we really haven't been changing anything on the SQLite side for a long time, and we don't really plan to. So I came to the conclusion, like, we've had the registry serve command and all of the other SQLite related commands deprecated for almost 2 years. I do know that there are use cases where people are still using OPM registry add and OPM index add and all the other subcommands to build SQLite catalogs still. But it seems like we can go ahead and remove the serve side of it. And people can still migrate those SQLite databases to FBC and then serve that way. So I threw this issue up basically to kick that discussion off and see if anyone had any major objections, or oh my gosh, it's absolutely critical for us to still be able to serve the SQLite database. It's not possible for us to migrate to FBC and then serve. Yeah, just wanting to get some discussion going here. This is basically the first time that any of us have talked about removing any of the SQLite things. So I figure that it's going to be an interesting conversation.
So I know that my product teams still have SQLite catalogs, as much as I tell them that they shouldn't, and that they are still using those in their catalog source images, and that they haven't even done the migration step, which is something that, I feel like is probably overdue and we should do, but at the moment we haven't done. Is there any reason for removing it other than just cleaning up the code base? Is it actually old? Is it actually insecure? Is it actually not receiving bug fixes that it needs? Or
pretty much the same comment, because our team also, while we understand that we have to use, we want to move into FBC, but actually due to the resource constraints, we are always delaying it, right? So we understand that it's perhaps not receiving new updates. What's the reason of having it explicitly removed versus just marked as, I don't know, deprecated or something?
Yeah, so it's been deprecated for 2 years. The main reason that I think I'm suggesting it's time for removal is the fact that it's diverging from the FBC server. And we're only putting effort into the FBC server. And it'll be harder and harder for us to have any guarantees around the SQLite server at all. So mainly it comes down to just the maintenance and support of this thing and keeping it going. So I think my suggestion is that we remove it. If people still depend on it, then okay, maybe you just need to stick with that older version of OPM and continue using it that way.
Also, Joe, I think, oh, Ankita had her hand up. Go for it, Ankita.
I had a question about, eventually we're planning to switch to catalog D entirely, and if I'm not mistaken, images the catalog D uses don't even require OPM to be on the image. So would it be more sensible to just use a different sort of build for FBC rather than the, changing the binding that goes into SQLite?
So Ankita, I think catalog D is OLM v1, which is, we are talking about OLM v0 right now. And these catalogs that are being built, they are mainly running in OLM v0. So essentially the pipelines that are building, they are, what we're talking about is the OPM registry serve being used in those catalogs. So I think OLM v1, that'll be a little bit further away, but I think we're talking about what do we do in the interim. The reason that I raised my hand is because I think, Joe, you mentioned a point that we might have just skipped over it, but it's a very salient point, even though it's subtle, which is, it doesn't mean that even if you do migrate over to newer versions of OPM after this is done, it doesn't mean that you will have to stop using SQLite. For whatever reason, if you have a SQLite database, all you need to do, all the change that needs to happen is, instead of doing OPM serve registry serve, you'll switch the command to OPM serve FBC, and you can migrate that SQLite to FBC. So hopefully that is also an incentive to make sure, or that acquiesces all the concerns about getting this removed altogether.
Yeah, I guess so. I was going to make pretty much the same comment on it. I guess my question is there a reason why we can't just make OPM registry serve a wrapper for the FBC serve and have it just do the migration and then serve the new API?
No, that's technically possible.
Yep.
I still wonder, like, are we going to ever remove any of this? Like, I guess like 2 years running with a deprecation notice, it seems like it would be totally reasonable for us to just remove it.
Yeah, that's so +1 for that. I think if we do not remove that, we are also incentivizing to not have resources to actually do the work in some way. So hopefully this incentivizes to actually allocate resources to do the migration.
Am I right in thinking, was there a command that you can use with OPM that generates the Docker file for actually building the image with an SQLite database on it?
I don't think so. I think so. There's OPM generate Docker file with an FBC directory.
Okay. So OPM generate only works with FBC. Yeah. Okay. I was wondering if that might be a better command to remove.
This is a good point. Yeah, good point, James, because yeah, so Kevin is talking about how OPM index add will do this. So we'd have to figure out what that means. So that could be a blocker for removing this.
I mean, we could be looking at removing all of those commands, couldn't we? I mean, maybe instead of just having issues to remove the registry serve, because if you have the other commands, then you can build something that you need registry serve for. If you don't have the other commands, then you don't need registry serve anymore. So shouldn't we have an issue for remove SQLite?
Well, yeah. The reason I didn't go that far yet is because I know there are still use cases of using the imperative registry add commands to build a database and then migrating that to FBC and serving. So I don't think our FBC, our pure FBC story is mature enough probably yet to completely remove all SQLite yet. But it does seem like it's mature enough to say, okay, well, we don't need to actually serve SQLite anymore. So that's why I started here. So
maybe this last suggestion then of the automatic migration could be the right one. To be honest, I'm all for removing it. But in order to remove it, I think what we should do is say, hey, this in release X, this is going to be removed, right? And actually give some warning that it will be removed. And I know that's what deprecation is supposed to be, but what we've had so far is kind of untimelined deprecation. Whereas if we actually said we're going to take this out, it's going to be out in this version, then that at least gives teams a point to say, right, we need to have an alternative solution by then. Yeah, that's totally reasonable. I didn't. Part of this issue is not to say we're going to remove it right now. It's to figure out how to remove it. So if we want to say, like, yes, we should update the deprecation warning of this particular subcommand to say it will be removed, you know, in September or in X release, that seems like a reasonable way forward to, you know, help people understand what's happening in advance. But Kevin's point about OPM index stuff, I think we would have to go back and specifically look at, because that makes assumptions that there is an OPM registry serve command. Okay, so next steps for this one then. Is that the next thing to do then, is to investigate that and kind of elaborate a bit more on what removal would actually mean, what we would change in all of the different commands to take it out? Yep, I think what you've got captured here seems like a good enough set of things for us to go and expand on this a little more. Okay, great. Any comments from anyone else about the notes I've written? Have I missed anything or anything else to add? Cool. Right, I'll stick those on the work item and we can jump along the agenda. So quick demo of the CLI tools.
Yeah, that's me.
I think I saw, yeah, I did see you. Yeah, good. Hey, do you want to take screen?
Yeah, I need to take screen. All right, 1 second. You should see my screen now. So today I want to show a few CLI tools for OLM. So we are looking into setups where some of the components will not be present on the cluster, and some of the operations would be performed off cluster. For example, resolution of the specific package. So we are working on two tools at the moment. One is Rupak CLI. Varsha is working on this one, and for resolution we work on DEPI CLI or resolution CLI. We don't have any specific name at this stage. At least I don't. So what I want to show is,
are you able to increase the font size at all?
Oh, that's a good question. No, this is. Yeah, it's not my terminal.
It's a recording. Okay, that's all right.
Is it too small? Damn it.
No, I'm okay.
Maybe okay. Well, I guess I will try to increase the font size next time I record. Apologies if it's hard to read. Okay, so here is the how it works today. So I just show that we with the current state, it's like first iteration for the resolution CLI. We don't need operator controller running on the cluster, but we still do need catalog D to run on the cluster. Here's you can see that there is no operator controller running on the cluster. How it works is that we can say, okay, I want to resolve Prometheus, and we call this resolution CLI, which uses the kube config at the moment. You say, okay, give me this package. You can, or give me this package of this specific version, or give me this package of this specific version and channel basically the same set of inputs you can specify on the operator objects at the moment. And it will give you the image reference for the bundle. And after that, you can feed it to the Rupak CLI for of cluster installation. So here's just a example of resolving a few things here. And now I will feed the image reference to the Rupak CLI, which was developed by Varsha, just to make sure that I am not claiming any credit for this. So here you can see that the image is being unpacked. And yeah, it will take a bit of time. And you can see on the cluster that there is now bundle deployment for this image. That's basically it. So this is the first iteration, which I completed last week. Today I'm working on next iteration for this. I'm trying to get rid of the dependency on catalog D, so I can give the resolution tool a directory or an image with the index, so it can just read from the index and resolve without having catalog D or any catalog source on the cluster, or without having a cluster at all. And that's basically it. I think there are still open questions, like what is the minimal amount of, what is the minimal set of OLM components we want to have on the clusters and things like that. But I think those questions are not blocking me now. But if anyone has any thoughts or input, I'm interested to hear that. That's it. Thanks for the time. And if anyone has any questions, happy to answer them here or on Slack.
So Piotr has a question in the chat. Are those CLI tools? Oh, it just scrolled now. I can't read it. Are those CLI tools intended to be used by the customers, or are they stopgap CLI to use the individual APIs developed so far?
I think I'm not sure that what stopgap. What do you mean by stopgap?
So are they just kind of testing now, or are we actually planning to allow customers to run these tools long term to install packages?
Right. Yes. So for now, this is just a proof of concept. I think it will have a little bit different shape, but I can see a scenario where, for example, a customer has cluster which has very limited resources, like edge deployments, where they don't want to run catalog on the cluster, and their they have fleet of the clusters which are they maintaining on a specific state and have specific set of operators installed. So those operations can be done as part of some automation off cluster, and where you can say, okay, I want to resolve this as part of some pipeline, and only give the resolution results to the cluster and install something specific on the cluster as part of the offline resolution. So yeah, I think this will be hopefully used by end customers.
Sounds good. So there's an answer from Varsha in the chat as well, saying that the intention is to expose them so that people don't have to actually run the RUCPack controllers on the cluster if they don't want to, which is a good use case. That's great. Thank you very much for the demo. Any more comments from anybody else before we move on?
Is it possible to combine this with a way to run entirely offline? So you could give this thing a catalog.
Yeah, that's
yeah.
This is my second iteration. So I have as of today, I already have some kind of working solution which reads from a file system with a file-based catalog from the file system. It still needs some work, but hopefully maybe I'm aiming to have another demo by the next community meeting where I can show completely offline use of the catalogs without any cluster. But yeah, we'll see how it goes. Maybe I'll stumble upon some issues, but that's my aim. Stay tuned.
That's pretty cool. The use case that I can immediately see is OC Mirror. Like it needs to basically do what you just showcased, right? It needs to find stuff from the catalog according to selection criteria from the user, and that should not just be parsing the catalog. It should actually resolve as is, as if OLM would resolve it on cluster. So including dependencies or other stuff, more preconditions and requirements. So it seems very useful for that scenario. Is it portable in the sense that you showed the CLI now, but I assume this is also like a library which could be used in other projects like OC Mirror?
Yeah, at the moment I'm like dumping everything in one package just to get something working. But the idea is to have a library shared between at least operator controller and the resolution CLI, and maybe we will be able to export it for others to use as well. I guess that depends on how we want to go. This is still up for discussion.
Yeah, lots of similar comments in the chat about doing dependency resolution off cluster before starting to do stuff. Okay, we've got a couple of people with hands up. Joe, I think, had a hand up.
Yeah, I think another thing that we could look at here, and you alluded to this a little bit, But like what if well, there's two things, I guess. So one is we haven't quite gotten to the point of doing resolution based on what's on the cluster right now. So like doing the constraints like you have for like, oh, only select from this package and this version, this channel, like that's all based on what's coming out of the catalog. In the next few milestones, I would expect that we'll start looking at constraints that are packaged in the bundle that say stuff like, oh, I have to have a Kubernetes version that matches, 127 or greater, or I have to have this API available. Where that API might not be something that's provided by the catalog, and it might be something that's like part of the cluster. So I'm curious, and maybe you've thought about this, but I'm curious how you would envision this sort of CLI working in a case where bundles have constraints on the cluster itself rather than just on each like other things in the catalog. So that's one thing. I think the other thing that would be interesting to look at here is, what if instead of having the RucPack CTL install tool talk to a cluster to apply stuff, it just output on standard out the resulting bundle release manifest sort of things, right? So like I would expect like that thing could output the CRDs and the deployments and the RBAC and all of that you want to apply. And then it's up to the caller to decide, oh, okay, I just want to pipe that into kubectl apply-f, or I want to check that output into my Argo CD pipeline and have it manage it. Like there's lots of interesting use cases we could build on.
Like a Helm render, you mean?
Yeah, essentially. So those are the two things I'm sort of most interested in following up on here, but this is super cool.
Yeah, I will try to answer the first thing. Sorry, what was the first? Right. The first thing about the uncluster constraints. This is something I want to look into to some extent after having offline catalog. So what I had in mind so far is that we will probably have to dump some information from the cluster for offline use, as an option, right? So currently, in this specific demo, today we have two things which reach out to the cluster. One is catalog, so I'm working to eliminate this, and another one is to list all the operators already installed on the cluster, basically the same as operator controller does today on cluster. So this is one of the things I want to eliminate as well. So maybe the future for this will look like something like must gather, where we dump relevant information into some input file and give it to the CLI to use. But this is like very, very early thoughts, and I haven't thought it through properly. So that's to address the first thing. The second was about RucPack CLI, right? I think I will probably have to defer this question to Varsha. Varsha, do you want to comment on the second one about how RucPack CLI how we want to build the RucPack CLI?
Yeah, so the intention there, just to give an overall view, Joe, as you said, the RucPack does two things, unpack and install. So the idea is to write separate plugins to that. So essentially what you said would look like RucPack CLI unpack, and you can specify the output option, and then it will show you the manifests which are to be installed, similar to what you said. And on a longer run, the idea would be to have the unpack process itself customizable by having by letting users to have their own logic for unpacking. So that's the long-term goal which RucPack CLI is looking at.
Thanks. Joe, did we answer your questions?
Yeah, there weren't really questions so much as just things that I'm thinking about. But yeah, that all sounds pretty good. Thanks, guys.
Okay, I think Alex is next.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that I'm really excited to see all the discussion that's happening, that was spawned from this demo. So what I would like us to do is probably create a discussion thread to talk about like what they'd like to see next in the off-cluster resolution experience that we're kind of offering with this demo, right? So that means like what RuckPack could do, what Depi as a CLI tool could do. And in that discussion, I would love to see like real use cases that people might think it could support. So we have a number of people here who use OLM at scale in production environments, and I'm sure they've hit use cases where, you know, an on-cluster component isn't exactly what they're looking for. So I think Nikolai mentioned the, you know, like a lightweight cluster kind of situation, or somewhere where they didn't want a running operator. So I'd love to see that discussion. And then likewise, you know, as we do milestone development, one of our core deliverables that we really want to see us do is source more features or suggestions from the community. And we've kind of discussed how you can create a discussion on, I think it's like under a feature request. I can't remember the exact tag, but so if we could create those discussions to help drive what features we develop next and source those from the community, that'd be awesome. So again, let's all make sure to take advantage of that medium so that we can drive the project forward as a community. Thank you.
Are you happy to open a discussion topic on that, Alex, for people to chime in on?
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. So
cool.
You know,
I'll stick
individual
down as an action item.
Yeah, so I'll make a catch-all for like, hey, this is where an off-cluster thing could be helpful. And then if everybody else could go and just submit individual feature requests that they want, and they could even reference that ticket or discussion, that'd be great.
Cool. Thank you very much. Any more on Nikolai's demo? Okay, let's move on then. So next up on the agenda, we have resolution problems in Depi. Per, are you still here?
Yep, here.
Great. Did you want to take the screen?
Yeah. Yes, but I can't share while someone else is sharing.
In which case, I will stop and you can take it instead.
Wait a second. I have too many Chromes open. All right. Well, and it doesn't give me a.
If it's just a document, I'm happy to share it for you if it helps.
No, it's all good. I just need to. Oh no, that's not going to happen. Yeah, just if you could share it, I'll just.
Coming up.
But I won't be able to do the demo until I restart because I needed to change the setting. But I'm just going to use the RFC here for guidance on my thoughts. So I wanted to talk a little bit about Depi and kind of why it exists and what it does, how it does what it does, and the problem that I've been thinking about lately. So at some point in OLM v0's history, Dan Messer or some other PM decided that operators needed dependencies. So dependency manager was put in, which under the covers uses a satisfiability solver to decide on the package selection. So essentially it just says, hey, these are the bundles that I need based on their dependencies, pull out, tell me all of the bundles that I need for, the given intent of installing a particular operator or set of operators. Eventually this changed over time, and eventually we had to also do constraints around the runtime environment. For instance, check that the bundle version is within the max OpenShift version or something like that, or the Cube API version is supported, and so on. But the way that the this resolver had been built, it was very highly coupled to the universe of OLM. So it spoke in terms of subscriptions and clustered service versions and bundles. So when adding a new kind of data source, like, what's the cluster that I'm going to run this on, it could become a little bit hard to sort of reconcile all of these things into what was there. So that made it, non-trivial to extend it to other concepts like the cluster runtime constraints, how to add features. It was also very hard to troubleshoot. So it's very difficult to get visibility into the resolution process to why something might be failing. And you're limited in how you can influence the behavior of the resolution. So in case it's stuck, so you might need to do the OLM dance or something like that to get it to rerun again on different input and get unstuck. So in some cases, users would just need to wait until we fix the problem in the resolver and release the new version of OLM in order to get basically unstuck. So really the first thing that we did, so in recognizing this when trying to think of OLM v1, the first thing that we did was to take out from OLM v0 the core resolver. So basically remove all of the OLM bits from around it. Hold on a second. And in doing so, we basically reduced it. So we brought it back down to the right level of abstraction where we could then go and support these multiple different sources. And we essentially have a solver, which takes a slice of variable as input. A variable can contain many constraints. And the solve method will return in the solution the list of selected bundles. So you're essentially describing your problem as a set of variables with constraints, giving it to the solver, and then it tells you, okay, these are the variables that got selected. These are the bundles that you want, or whatever question you're trying to answer. So, but then the bit that's missing, and the interesting part, or well, the part that I've been thinking about lately, is the bit that we kind of threw away when we went through this leaning exercise. So now we have a way to solve problems, but we took away the part that actually modeled the problem by sensing the environment, by having access to the repository metadata to see what can be installed, what the constraints are, and so on and so forth, right? So then how can we fill that gap? So how do we construct a resolution problem? So if we can term it that, which is essentially this set of variables that needs to react to changes coming from a diversity of input sources, be it cluster runtime, repository metadata, whatever it may be, while also being able to support additional input sources at runtime. So to overcome this challenge, what I tried to do was add semantics and mutability to versions and constraints. So this means that you can identify variables and constraints by what they look like or what properties they carry or their kind. And you can mutate the state of these variables and constraints. And so you aggregate a whole bunch of, let's say, listeners or observers of the state. And when they detect a particular, when they hit a particular activation state, so they can see a variable of the particular type with the particular properties, it can go and mutate the problem by adding variables, adding constraints to variables, and making use of its local data, be it from a catalog source, or the cluster itself, or querying for what bundles are installed and things like that. All the bits that we might need to model in this problem that we're trying to resolve. So I have a nice diagram. Well, I'm not sure if it's nice, but it's a diagram. If we can scroll down to it. So this is kind of how I put it together. I have this kind of mutable resolution problem, which maintains the variable store. It knows about a whole bunch of different, what I term variable sources, which are the things that mutate the resolution problem. And what this what the variable sources are guaranteed is to process each variable successfully once. So once they hit a state where they're being activated, they won't activate for that state ever again. However, they can raise fatal errors to stop the process as a whole, or they can signal retry errors, which say, maybe a precondition wasn't met. This particular variable was interesting to me, or this particular state was interesting to me, but it wasn't complete yet. So I need to wait for it to change some more before I can act. And they get a last chance to act on variables that they couldn't successfully process after there are no more changes made to the problem. So one last chance to either throw a fatal error, or just accept that the precondition was never detected, so it's not a problem. And by the way, feel free to stop me at any time. So all of this at the moment is in memory, or it's just designed as different structs and interfaces. But the implementations of these structs and interfaces is what would allow you to move this around between the CLI and the and on cluster.
So Per,
Yep.
I think I have 2 comments so far.
Mhm.
Or 1 comment, 1 question. The comment is, I think, taking us slightly back to the part where you were talking about removing away OLM abstractions, right? And this is probably a nit, but might help us make sure that we are staying focused on what DEPI is supposed to do. Essentially, what I'm thinking is, yes, DEPI is a wrapper around the SAT solver. But then, is it really accurate to say that we've taken away OLM specifications or specific, requirements of OLM words essentially inside that package? Because yes, we might have taken away, the part where it says, get me the CSVs or get me the subscriptions and stuff like that. But the wrapper is still saying that it still talks in terms of dependencies and constraints. So these are all that are later on modeled to variables. So if, like you mentioned, we decided that we needed to have dependencies being specified for each packages. That itself is an OLM concept. So if you actually look at it, there is still a tie-in between DEPI and OLM as a product. Isn't that correct?
So I'm just trying to figure out how to answer. What I mean is, in terms of affecting, like from the outside, being able to affect the resolution behavior, you need to use OLM verbiage, because that's how the model. Oh, sorry, the problem was modeled in the first place. Like we collect all of these subscriptions and whatever other state that's OLM-y, and then we kind of put all that together into a problem. So yes, I mean, those requirements still exist, but the point is that they can be fulfilled by something a little bit more general, and where you would pack that knowledge, that domain-specific knowledge, into the implementation of these variable sources. And maybe if I'm able to share my screen, I can show you an example, or I can send the link to be shared. But does that help answer the question? So the thing is, like, some variable sources here will deal with OLM concepts. Some will deal with cluster concepts. Some could deal with, I don't know, time concepts. It doesn't really matter. The point is, how do they come together to create this problem, which will then tell OLM what the next state should be? Does that make sense to everyone?
Okay, yeah, it makes sense to me. I see the abstraction there more clearly now.
Right.
Even though, yeah, even though it's not, it's talking about dependencies and stuff like that, but then it can be any variable source that specify or that models these dependencies in terms of variables. So it doesn't have to be necessarily an OLM resource. It can be a cluster.
Exactly. It's just talking about variables. So if we ground it in an example, so let's say we have one variable source which stamps out a package required variable. I think that's even the example in text there. And in its properties, it has three different keys: OLM package name, OLM package version, OLM package channel. Then you can have another variable source which waits for package required variables, and it has access to a repository, right? So it can then go extract those parameters, run the query, figure out which bundles can fulfill the query, create the variables for those bundles, and attach the dependency of that variable to those bundles, and also sort it so that you can have preference sorted. So, you know, you would prefer higher versions of the bundles. And then you could have another one which watches for OLM variable bundles, and there are keys in there to describe the bundle, and it knows how to get the package dependencies for this bundle, or the GVK dependencies for the bundle, and creates the necessary variables and everything else. And then you have the global constraints, which monitor for bundles, and then depending on the GVKs they provide, or the packages, or the package it belongs to, it updates a specific constraint in a specific variable. Does that make sense?
It does.
Too deep.
We've got a couple more. Yeah, we've got a couple more questions, and we've got one more topic on the agenda. So I just want to move into the other questions, if that's all right.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Let's
Kenny?
wrap it, and I can, you know, try again next week, or finish it next week, or asynchronously.
Well, let's try and hit at least one more of the questions. So in the chat, Victor is asking, is the tool long-lived? How does it persist state? And what's the expected environment? Does it run on a cluster? I'm assuming the answer there is yes.
Yeah, so this is designed to be portable, so it can run in the cluster or in the CLI. This is just an architecture. You can implement these processes that change the problem depending on the state they perceive, in, you know, in any kind of way. It could even be another reconciler for some on-cluster resource.
Cool. And how does it persist its state? Does it persist state?
In memory, it just rebuilds it. So you only need, you know, you need the most up-to-date information. So basically, you're going to query when you start a new round, you're going to query each of these variable sources and get them to apply their changes. And then once all that's done, that's it. You have your collection of variables.
That makes sense. And then we had a hand up, Daniel.
Yeah, and one question around performance, specifically because with the current resolver, I think I remember in the past that we couldn't do some stuff that we wanted to do because it would have required that the SAT solver is continuously running or running at least very often, and that would cause performance concerns. And I was just wondering, do you have any idea if that's going to be like about the same performance as the SAT solver that we have, or it's going to be slower or faster?
So this doesn't affect the stat solver side. This is just putting together the variables together. So having said that, the latency that it takes to execute this process will need to be added to then the time it takes to actually solve the problem. So through my own tests, I was doing. So I tried the Sudoku problem and to try and model it in this way, and that took a few seconds. Although it has a fair number of variables, but also the way that I put everything together was very inefficient. I still think we can get sub-second with this because I don't expect these the number of these nodes to be like massive.
So the one thing that it's probably worth, I had the same thought, Daniel, but then the way that the dependency resolver V0 evolved was they also started out with, we maintain the state in memory, but then eventually when we got to a point where it's thousands of namespaces being resolved or resources in those namespaces, it got so slow that there was a cache introduced. So I think what my thought was that this is great for the first iteration, and then as we go and put this into the real world, see how the performance is, we'll naturally iterate to something that is performant. As in, what I'm saying is we don't necessarily probably have to solve for that or worry about that right now. When we get into those situations, I'm sure that you will see that there is a problem and we'll have to iterate on them anyway.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Okay, so we've only got a few minutes left, so I won't ask for any more questions on that one. But thank you for the demo, Per. If anyone has comments, where do they put them? Or just against the document or somewhere else?
Yeah, that would be very much appreciated if I could get some reviews on the document. If there's any questions or things that I missed, I can spruce it up, and then hopefully we can either accept it or move on to something else.
Okay, great. So reviews, please, and comments on the document itself would be appreciated. Okay, so we've got one more topic on the agenda from Piotr. Do you want to go, Piotr?
Yes. So thanks. I don't think it will be conclusive here, but I'm just looking for the guidance from the team here. In terms of for OLM so far, OLM V1 so far, here we are discussing, the fundamental problems, how operators are deployed. But as a reminder, there is a parallel discussion which is happening in email as an email chain. Perhaps it needs to be surfaced as GitHub ticket, where we are interested in trying to understand how OLM V1 could help with solving multi-tenant type of deployments on the shared OCP clusters. So I'm referring to the email exchange that we are having with Daniel and Andy and the conversation we were having on different forums. I'm looking for the guidance, actually, how we surface this discussion, how we move forward. Should I open a discussion in a repo, so therefore people will chime in here? Or essentially, I'm looking for the guidance, right? We want to make sure that we understand how to migrate from OLM V0 into V1, addressing multi-tenancy scenarios.
Andy's got a hand up.
Thanks. Yes, I think starting a discussion and raising your questions and concerns would be a good thing. I also have on my plate a to-do to flesh out a document that I've started that enumerates the different tenancy options that we potentially could foresee, and share those with the community as well for feedback and discussion. It hasn't gotten my immediate attention because I'm working on some other things that have shorter time horizons, but it is on my to-do list.
Okay, so I'm going to put that on the actions, and we've got a couple of comments already agreeing that opening a discussion topic is the right thing to do. Right, so we have one more thing on the agenda, which is the release planning thing here, but as far as I'm aware, that was currently empty, so I wasn't too worried about getting to it in time. So I think unless there are any other business or any other comments, we would call that a day for today's call, because it is now exactly 1 hour after.
Thank you, James.
Thank you, everybody, for your demos and joining in and the discussion.